Robert, so amazing to
Doing one in person.
do one in person. Yes, we have been. I don't know the sequence in which this will appear, but we've been recording our conversations over the past couple of weeks. We are very excited about that, and we are doing this largely online, or only online actually. And today I'm in Edinburgh.
And today I'm in Edinburgh too.
Yes, which is fantastic. So we are here on the Harriet Watt University campus, and we wanted to continue the conversation. I think the one of the conversations that we've been having is, what do we call this conversation? And I think I said, how about the ivory tower? Because it is, to play on the fact that we both work.
We both live in one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you added the beyond the ivory tower.
Because we both want to get out of one.
That's so true. But I think as we were talking, this notion of the maps and how maps are needed and how maps have been shaping and framing how we think and how we feel. So we came up with this idea of maybe leadership happens when, or needed the most, when the map runs out.
Yeah.
And if there is any time in which our maps are running out, financially, academically, geopolitically, and otherwise, is probably now. So we are talking about this notion, and actually, we wanted to do this right, to call it the right thing. Yeah, but we also agreed not to spend a lot of time trying to make it perfect first. Yeah. So this is really how this conversation is starting. Yes.
So we are recording for posterity or failing fast.
Well, yes, and I think we talked about failing or succeeding, and I hope we agreed, and we keep on repeating this. I think someone, if this really succeed, will feel like, why these people were so unsure of themselves. I think even if nobody listens to this, and it's just for us as a way of recording our thoughts and seeing how we could put them together, maybe in a book or otherwise, but also in a way, I think for our friendship to have something to anchor it further, which is really great. It's a purpose, yes.
Yeah, because when we used to work together, we had to speak to each other regularly, regardless.
That's right.
And now that we don't work together, if you don't make the time, it just evaporates.
But actually, to sort of recognize the fact that there are a number of people who left our organizations, and I don't necessarily keep in touch with them. But I think you and I, we always made the effort to meet whenever it's possible, and we even made the effort to speak even after we are no longer in one organization, which is, I think, is a good test of friendship. That it's not.
And a good test of conversations.
That's right.
Come back to them.
That's right.
And so far in our conversations for this purpose, we've talked a bit about things that we're both interested in around leadership.
Yes.
And around the nature of education, particularly university education.
That's right.
And how those things are changing. We've talked a bit about strategy and how strategy applies to both organizations and nation states and brands, but also to individuals and to careers and to choices.
Yep.
And in one of those conversations, we talked about this idea of having a map, and that idea that leadership is when maps runs out came up live in the conversation.
That's right.
So we're wrestling with what to call the podcast in order to arrive at a name which is authentic to the content of our conversations, but also unique in the world, and that's been our challenge. So I do still think we will be talking about getting out from beyond the ivory tower, or at least a thing which I feel really strongly about, the relationship between the academy and the ivory tower and the real world, quotes unquote, real world beyond the world of the university. Because unless we're having dialogue across that boundary, we're talking to ourselves rather than to the wider world.
That's right.
And universities have such an important part to play in the world, only if they are in the world, not outside of that realm. So that I still think there is something in that. But this idea that's come up in our conversations so far about the difference between following somebody else's map and having to make a map up yourself in real time as you figure out what you're trying to do.
Yes.
and the strategy and the leadership required to do that. And then the other strand of that conversation is the educational process, which applies at every stage of your career. Senior leaders need to be mindful of how they're going to learn to do this.
That's right.
And we as academics have to be mindful of how we'll teach people at all career stages, actually, if you believe in lifelong learning, how they're going to engage with education. Especially, as we spoke in another of our conversations, especially since the idea of acquiring knowledge has been so disrupted by technology. You would just ask and generative AI, and it will tell you all the world has ever thought about a subject. That's not the same thing as learning or creating knowledge or applying knowledge.
You're right. So I'm also liking this name as when the maps run out. I think that's quite an interesting thing. I don't know whether people will get it, but I think you were also thinking of adding like a subtitle or
like all good academics, you have interesting thing, what's this actually about?
Yes. So we can consider that. So we are talking about it, and we are producing everything by ourselves. By the way, now the editing is done by us. The stuff that we want to put on social media. So it may not be perfect. It will not be perfect, but
it will be authentic.
It will be authentic, yes. And I think that's very, very important. Today, we also talked about the commitment, I think, to this project, because it's very important that we are committed to it, to have longevity and for something to come out of it. And we came up with this idea of, we will not stop until probably get 100 episodes of this. And we started by your suggestion of putting a time in the diary every Friday, 1 p.m. your time, 8 p.m. my time in Kuala Lumpur, and we will talk about something every time we meet. Yeah,
exactly. So you often hear of people coming into big jobs, whether they're in politics or business or universities, of the importance of the first 100 days.
That's right.
So we're going to talk about the importance of the first 100 episodes.
That's right. And the more I thought about our first conversations, I realized that the 100 episodes may not be sufficient, because talking about maps for not only changing world, but the fact that in our lives, the changing stages, as we age, as we move from one job to the other, as we get promoted from one level of work and performance and leadership to the other, as we work with others, our children, our students, there's always things to be talked about. And one of the things that I'm personally very interested in is to talk about this concept of retirement, for example. Something I personally hope that I will never need to go through or do, because I would like to continuously contribute and feel sort of relevant, and the stuff that I have is needed, while I have some other people who think that they're looking forward to retirement, and I think both positions are valid. Yeah.
First of all, you and I are approaching a stage in our life where it becomes something tangible rather than something so far away that you couldn't imagine it.
Yeah.
And so you begin to realize that you're working with people who are retiring,
Mm.
who maybe are not that different in age from you.
Right.
Some a little younger, some a little older. I've found that really quite strange, to realize that the prospect of not working full time in the way that I have done it isn't going to go on forever and ever. But also, I think I'm conscious as that's happened over my working life, and from when I first started working in universities till now, that some of the people, when you go to their retirement do, it's really nice that we mark somebody's contribution to the university.
That's
and we have
right.
a gathering, we have cake, and we have a nice speech, and we collect some money and give them a gift. But some people in those things, it's pretty clear that this period of working was only to earn the right to not work. It was almost just an economic transaction.
Right.
I'm desperate to be finished with this so that I can go on with doing something else. And there's a different attitude with some people, which is, I never really want to stop working because I don't regard this as work.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with somebody the other day who has run a university, who's recently retired. And what she said was, what's most different is getting control of your diary back. It's not that she's not doing anything anymore, but it's just not in the same intensity and not driven by somebody else's agenda so much.
Yeah.
And I sometimes reflect on that relative to what you hear from entrepreneurs who start their own business, that they're being your own boss is a thing. And so retirement for folks like us who don't work for companies that we founded, we work for other people.
That's right.
Sense of retirement is the transition from working to somebody else's agenda to working on an agenda that you have to co-create.
Yeah. So the bottom line, of course, hopefully we will get into this because I'm personally very interested in it, is probably there will be 10 episodes to talk about that, how we think about it, how we feel about it, what is the research, and maybe some other people who have done it, some other people who are fearing it or dreading it. And we can talk about all of that, but there are multiple things like that we could talk about.
And because we have the privilege of having access to students who are at a different life stage,
That's right.
It'd be really interesting to ask some students what they think about retirement when it's an idea which is decades away for them.
That's right. That's right. So these are some of the concepts that potentially our project or co-project or podcast could actually focus on, and we are letting it evolve in sort of spontaneous way. So we are not entirely managing it, but it actually is beautifully evolving. So that's really good. Yeah.
And so a thing which we started in our first conversation by saying this has been a decade in the making, because we've been talking to each other in different forms, sometimes as colleagues, sometimes not, for 10 years, really. And if we commit to doing 100 episodes, there'll be at least another 2 years of conversations that will be curated.
You're right.
And it'll be interesting to see what emerges, because already in the first 4 or 5 conversations, some really quite striking things have emerged for me.
Absolutely.
Moved my thinking forward about what's the relationship between leadership and strategy and education and the nature and role of education and research in society today.
And Robert, I think we also talked about that a little bit off camera. The nature of intellectual contribution, where in the past, or at least for both of us, the sequence of creating, let's say, a book, which is quite a major kind of undertaking. It starts by some thinking and some research, and then writing things, and then going through them, and then coming up with drafts and sharing them with people. And that way of doing things now, partly at the age of AI, may not be the right way anymore. Because there are shortcuts some people may use. You could produce content that's sufficient for a book in minutes, and the fact that we are talking about the concepts and seeing them evolve live in front of us, and then after that testing them with people, and then potentially maybe putting them in a book. And I feel there'll be some chapters about actually the books themselves and creating them, and will that remain something that humanity will do at the level that we have done for thousands of years? But then I think creating that intellectual mapping and branching and converging and diverging and enjoying that process itself, I think is going to be quite an interesting production process for a book or a thesis.
Yeah. So again, another former colleague of mine has a nice turn of phrase that is, for him at least, that writing is thinking. So in order to figure out what you think, you have to write it down.
That's right.
Something happens when you crystallize it in written form.
Yeah.
You become aware of whether it is as logically consistent and as tightly argued and as poetic as you'd like it to be. And in this conversation, or this series of conversations, we're doing a version of that, but it's talking as writing.
Yep.
And my recurring experience as an academic is that I think my sharpest thoughts about a subject area just after I've stood up teaching it. So there's something about the live in the moment making sense of, for me at least, that you kind of think that's a good way of explaining this, or this is a good example of, which hadn't occurred to me until I was on my feet and you had an audience's attention. And the benefit of these curated conversations is you can go back and say, that's a good idea. I'm going to try and write that up.
Right.
So there'll be this iteration between the initial spark of an idea which comes up in a dialogue, and then refining that live, and then thinking, how would I write that up? And so the book idea comes at the end, not the beginning.
I agree with you, and I actually think that this is going to move into the students' work as well, because I think this is again an area we can talk about. Many universities and professors are worried about whether their students are really learning, are really producing this work or not, or this is done by AI or some other technology. And I think if we move into a space where we get our students more into explaining and explaining their thoughts and their work and doing presentations. I know we do this, but I think we need to move into a space where most of the assessment is when someone present their ideas and defend them. And even and if these ideas were done with AI or with the help of AI or taken from somewhere else, that's immaterial. As long as you are able to internalize them, produce them, critique them, and accept the critique to them, I think that would be potentially even a more enjoyable way of using our time.
Yeah. And so that idea of journaling your thought process is true of the way in which education was assessed centuries ago.
That's
you would
right.
have these oral exams, these viva exams. You'd have to speak about something. And I often think maybe we're coming full circle back to a digital version of the way things used to be. That because you could press a button and produce 3,000 words on an essay topic, that's not so difficult.
Yes.
And I think it would be a mistake for the university sector to invest all its time and energy in developing more sophisticated ways of catching people,
Yes.
whilst people are developing more sophisticated ways of being able to evade capture.
Yes.
It seems to me like a relatively fruitless arms race.
I agree.
Whereas there's a much better idea, which is, okay, so you use all of that amazing technology around you, then come and talk to me.
Yes. Yeah. And actually my thinking around this, you see, we have this ratio of 1 to 20. Usually whatever you talk about accrediting bodies, they would say you need 20 students to one academic, or one academic to every 20 students. And this is actually a very interesting number, because if you have 20 people under your wing, you could remember their names, you could become an expert into them. But currently what's happening, because as academic staff, there are so many other things they need to do, admin work and all of that they actually don't have necessarily the time to know their students well. So if the academics were able to use technology to do most of that peripheral work on their behalf, so that then they create space for the conversation. And imagine if the classroom is one academic and 20 students, and they are sharing and critiquing each other's idea. And again, reminds me of the image that we have, what used to happen during, the Greek time or before that, where you have a teacher and people around them and they're working together and they know each other. I think that's quite an interesting way that where learning for the sake of learning is happening, rather than learning for the sake of passing the exam.
Yeah. So I've had the real privilege of working across different kinds of universities, one of which, the University of Glasgow, has been around since the year 1451.
Right.
And so when it started, there was one expert and a handful of people, and it was, I suspect, a bit like an apprenticeship. You hung out with the great mind, and the great mind didn't have to do student satisfaction surveys or net promoter scores or research excellence exercises, so they did a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And that's how the learning happened. These days, we both trained as engineers, right? Yes. So if you wanted to do introductory thermodynamics, for example, right? And you could say, who is the best person on the whole planet to teach me introductory thermodynamics? Which professor of engineering is so at the cutting edge of thermodynamics as a subject that they're the best person? And in theory, they could record something digitally, which is accessible to everybody on their phone and in their headphones. And,
that's right.
And so the process of supporting somebody's learning has now got this different relationship between the person who's created the knowledge and the person who's mediating the support, training, mentoring, advising, tutorial type support, and then the student. And I can remember a really interesting story someone told me, someone who was very senior in a university who was worried that when they came to do a guest lecture to some students, he faced a whole bank of students in a lecture theatre who were all on their iPads and tablets and laptops. And he was convinced they weren't listening to him. And he was quite upset that his expertise was not being used appropriately.
Yeah.
Right? And so the following week, he came back to the same first-year introductory course. And let's say that it was thermodynamic. It wasn't, but let's say that it was. And he came back to the lecturer who usually is with the students, and he observed them, but he didn't sit at the front. He came into the back of the lecture theatre and sat behind the students looking down. And he wasn't there to evaluate how good his colleague was at teaching thermodynamics. He was there just to see what the students were doing.
Yep.
And what he concluded was about 10% of the students who were watching a YouTube clip of a cat falling off a sofa or some great goal in a soccer game, but actually 70, 80, 90% of the students were watching somebody else teaching the same concept in a YouTube clip.
Right.
And saying, interesting, my guy from University of here is saying that this concept relates to that concept in the following way.
Yep.
Whereas this guy from University of somewhere else in the world, who's the highest number of hits for this concept in thermodynamics, she's saying, no, this thing relates in a different way. Ooh, what's going on? And so
what's going
it's
on?
an incredibly powerful resource.
It is.
And I think sometimes people at our career stage who learned under a completely different regime make assumptions about how seriously people are taking their learning and what they're doing and how distracted they are.
That's right.
And it's undoubtedly true that some people are distracted some of the time. But it's also true that some of the students in the classroom are operating in a very sophisticated way to try and maximize the efficiency and impact of the learning time that they spend.
Yeah. I agree with you. I also believe, when all that content is available, it is a responsibility for whomever, is assuming that role of teaching or standing in front of a crowd, that they need to be interesting. They need to be very well prepared. I think they need to be entertaining as well, because you think about it, the students who's waking up at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. to be ready for a class at 8 a.m. And if he or she goes to the classroom or the lecture theater thinking, the person who is teaching me, there is like 100 other people who are much better than them, and I'm here just because someone will take attendance, for example. I think we need to appreciate that this is a fact. Gone the days where the people need to show up at 8 o'clock, because if they miss the class, then that knowledge about the first law of thermodynamics will not be repeated. They have to now read it in the book, and maybe the book is not that clear. They don't have the opportunity to even ask questions. You see, I was talking to some of our students in Malaysia, and I said, how do you use AI? Back then was mainly ChatGPT. And he said, when I don't understand something, I just ask ChatGPT, say, explain it to me as if I was 8 years old. And that's actually very powerful in its own right, because when you are working with a professor, you don't have the audacity to tell him or her, could you please repeat that and assume that I know nothing in mathematics and nothing in this and physics and explain it to me. We don't do that. So I feel just like AI is disrupting everything. When it disrupts the work that you and I do, we need to become more entertaining, more engaging, and put more effort into that, so that people say, well, I could ask ChatGPT to tell me this, but when I go to Robert McIntosh, he will crack a joke, he will encourage me, he will comment on other things, and I think all of that will become the value that humanity adds.
And one of our former colleagues from Heriot Watt used to use the phrase live theatre. And so the difference between watching a recording or reading a book or going to someone who's just going through the motions is their ability to say, so you use an example and we'll work with your example now, so that it is specifically being generated in the moment.
That's right.
And I'm sure you have had the experience too, I certainly have, of being taught by or working with colleagues who appear in September 2026 and blow the dust off material that has been there for 20 years and just
Yes,
monotonously go through this
that's right.
process.
Yeah.
And I don't think that cuts it anymore. And back to this thing of all the way back to the beginning, some of the stories I heard when I first joined University of Glasgow and went on one or two tours of what is a beautiful campus, and, was of how their business model worked when they first moved to their campus in the West End of Glasgow. And it was that there's a place called Professor Square, so the professors were given a house and some staff, and they could do experiments and do their research, and they could write, and then they would give public lectures. And at the end of the public lecture, they would pass a hat round, and if you were no good,
Nobody
they
would
would put money in, and nobody would come back next week. And so the very brightest minds pushing the boundaries of science and engineering and philosophy and medicine had to be good, because that's how they earned their keep. And I do think modern academics are coming back to that environment, that the only reason a student would actually turn up in the lecture hall is because you're good.
So imagine if we actually don't pay our professors, or the university doesn't pay you and I, unless, backed by public demand. I mean, joking aside, I think it's people vote now through Net Promoter Score and things like that. But the real vote, when people vote with their money, I mean, if they decide to pay something, it means it's good. Yeah.
And in those days, centuries ago, the only way to access these insights and minds was in person at that location.
That's right.
And for a long period of time, up until quite recently, that was true. You could get the books from the library and try and teach yourself, but few people have the patience and capacity to do that. But these days, you can appropriate your own degree from feeds of social media platforms and from YouTube clips and decide how, and that's the individual. That's not usually, A, not often monetized, and B, not usually monetized by the university or the organization. It's the individual. I've lost count in the last few weeks of how many times on my social media platform a clip has come up saying, this is Professor Mushtaq. He's just retired from Stanford University or some elite university. And in his final lecture, he talked about his 30 years study of something. One of them was about strategy. That's what caught my attention. One of them was about game theory. And the tagline is often, spend an hour listening to this, you'll learn more than you would ever learn if you went to university.
That's right. That's right.
And so that's this process of that unraveling where the expertise is now presented as belonging to the individual, not the institution.
Yeah, and I think the world is changing. I also feel that there is more pressure now on the individual to become a brand in their own right. And I think the future of work, of course, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I feel with AI and all of that will become more entrepreneurial. So people will be, I don't even want to use the word hired, but they are able to earn their keep by being very good in one thing and delivering it in a certain way. It could be telling jokes or teaching thermodynamics or teaching, how to cook. I'm thinking more of the education side, of course. The other, even medicine and pharmacy and
so what you
and
need
all
to
of
do
that.
is teach how to cook using thermodynamics as the explanation of how hot it's got.
Yes.
While telling jokes. You're sorted.
Yeah, you're sorted, right? And joking aside, I think that's probably what will be needed, and then maybe teach thermodynamics without the people knowing that they're learning thermodynamics, and that's probably the best way to do it. So this is fantastic, Robert. I mean, so insightful, so enjoyable, really, to just continue these conversations. And it's a great day in Edinburgh today, and I foresee that we continue this online, but who knows, maybe we continue having things face to face, maybe here in Scotland, maybe in Malaysia, maybe even other parts of the world. By the way, are you having any plans to go and support Scotland live in
No, I'm not going to do that. I am going to America just after the World Cup with work. And no, I won't be going to the games, but I will be up in the small hours of the morning supporting our national team.
Fantastic. And I really wish Scotland all the best. It's a place, as you know, I love and I feel associated with in many, many ways.
And we love having you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thank you. Brilliant.